Is that what I'm going to look like at the end of this? My God. Um, well, hello. There's a few things to talk about tonight, I think. Um, while I was away, let's get this right. While I was away over the long weekend in Belfast, um, seeing, the Giant's Causeway, the Titanic Museum, you see a few tasters there. The poo pits have got everywhere. Giant's Causeway, fantastic place. And then, of course, I saw Ryan, one of our panelists, and his colleagues, Chris and Connor from the season 25 Blu-ray updated special effects team. A storm was brewing over the Irish Sea and the internet. My recent shows on the greatest show in the galaxy, in particular, built up a lot of resistance and angst from our followers. I thought it would be best to address these issues and focus more on those contentious elements of that program so that we can actually redress it and rebalance it properly. I used to do this as a teacher. I have to say, if you had a stinker of a lesson, you then had the lesson afterwards when you actually tried to right the wrongs or give everybody else a bit more of a say. So that's part of the essence of this, folks. So I've got comments up from some of our followers who said, Brendan, you and the panel, I've got it so wrong. And I was sat there in Belfast knocking down a pint at the time, So anyway, as we do that, I just want to remind you that we will have most of our comments from the greatest mess show in the galaxy. We'll also talk about the Bigenerate show last week because there's some tasty topics about RTD and Moffat and what they said. And just to remind you, the Bigenerates is back again live tomorrow at 2 p.m. with Problem Being and James. And we're discussing RTD and what he's discussed and when he was at the Gadio thing and he had things to say. And I'll go line by line. So tune in on that one. That's only tomorrow. But this is all about me being in the dock. It's not a trial of a Time Lord. This is me in detention. And did you ever have one of those detentions when you thought, how long is it going to go on for? Because I can't see a clock anywhere, might be one of those. So thanks for joining us. It might be a bit of a laugh, and we'll talk through these fun issues. Having been a teacher, like this is an apt moment, I have to say. And the Sensoria team of reviewers are all in the dock with me because I'm yanking them in. You know that kid who, when they're in detention, they always said, well, he said something and she said something, and they pull everybody in. Yeah, I'm gobbing on them all. So here we go. Here's a few reasons, though, and I think this is the fair bit first. Here's a few reasons why people didn't like our show too well. So here's a taster. Oh, it's one of those good fun ones tonight. I like it when things go well. I do have the evidence, but it just hasn't decided to show itself. If I do that and I just replace it, it will do the job properly for me. Here we go. It's a very good detention, this, isn't it? This is exactly what you want.
It's the self-referential aspects to this. You can do history of Doctor Who, you can do stuff like analyze stuff within it, but this whole thing of having a parody of Doctor Who fans, the whole question about whether there's more to that in terms of Andrew Cartmel and challenging what happened, it just grates.
I really struggle with Sylvester. Now, this is allowed by the producer, so I'm not having a go at the actor, but in his first two seasons, the slapstick and the physical humor that he was allowed to do and wanted to bring to it, he's got the role. Mm-hmm. This messing on with the umbrella, I just get so irritated by. It's just contrived. It doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. While he's trying to do the stunt every time with an umbrella, by that time they'd have been shot dead or whatever. It's just...
Well, this also feels like it's the most dated. It feels like the late 80s. It sounds like the late 80s. It's filmed like the late 80s. I can't think what they butchered the theme song. Oh my God, that was awful. The other eras of the Doctor, even the Sixth Doctor era, has like a timeless quality to it.
Yeah. Now, Sylvester's first season suffered from Mel and bad scripts. The second season, which is this one here, it seemed to suffer from odd scripts like this that didn't make much sense, to the overuse of that one synthesizer or two that was just constant drum beats and symphony orchestral stabs, and just it was almost like the soundtrack they had made for the War Games. It just almost never stopped.
Wait, I've got to be fair on when I've compared all the Doctor Who's before, from Power of the Doctor onwards, and Rogue, and I am going to say quite clearly to all of you that I think this needs special measures. I just think it tanks.
A very rare for me special measures.
So this is almost beyond special measures.
Yeah.
This is like, as Michelle said, nailing coffin, its fingers down the blackboard, seeds of doom for everything that comes after.
I believe I gave it needs improvement.
So there you go. Apart from making lots of strange mistakes tonight with the restream, it's a good time to have a detention. That's what we were starting to say, right? So let's start off with a few people, and please join in, folks, because this is obviously, I need to learn. This is supposed to be a cleansing process. Okay, right, Charlie. Straight away, you wrote this, didn't you, right, Charlie? Before you even saw the show, because you thought that actually my thumbnail was baiting you. I was actually giving you a hint at what we were about to say. I mean, it was a warning. But anyway, I take your point that you didn't like what we said in the show. But let's get to some of the key points here. So, Paul Roach, good to see you. Here we go. I profoundly disagree with you and panel's opinion on Greatest Show. It's no classic, but it's a bag of fun, stylish and creepy. Sylvester is having a great time, and his Doctor is evolving into the master manipulator. We know is the hallmark of his Doctor. And Ace is given character depth. I've loved all your streams so far, but I didn't enjoy this one. Yeah, and I get why. Now, Paul, I get what you're saying about this was the start really of seeing Sylvester. I mean, just before he went dark in the next series with the court, this was the beginning of them really trying to make him more ambiguous and mysterious with various sins. But I'm going to pick up on a few points in a minute. But like I said, I've got to be fair, because this is not a detention where I mouth off again. This is where I see what people say in the thread, and we play off each other a bit more. So you can see how we're going to do this, folks. So what I'll do straight away on the first element is I'll bring everybody in. I've seen Lord Thoth, Hasler, Sam Mills, Lee Smith, SG. I mean, the gang's here. We're all no, I've been naughty. So let's have a look. Let's take a look at what some people are saying so far. Mad Mackham's probably enjoying this because it's good distraction from Newcastle. Brendan, 100% truth so far. Right, Charlie. As you've just seen, yeah, but apart from that, you loved it. It has an element of where you see things actually even now, where you think the production values are still very good, the locations are good, and all the rest of it, and you just see how, unfortunately, it doesn't hold together in your estimation. But I know what you mean, right, Charlie? Let's have a look. Sticks boy there, Simon Mills, Sonny Waffles, Claude. The Greatest Show in the Galaxy was terrible. Felt like Doctor was on its way out back then and feels familiar to 2025. So he's on our side of the fence. So he's in detention too. Sadako, he's just kind of laying the boot in. Oddly, I did like the Greatest Show. Has anyone got a big point yet? I'll come to the next comment, don't worry. Mad Mackham, I could spend a happy hour describing how bad this was and still kind of loved it. Right, Charlie is really struggling with this one. So, Paul Richards, The Greatest Show isn't bad. It's better than some stories, better than Modern Who. Oh, yeah. I mean, this is one thing I do want to say before I go on to the next comment is, look, you know my past as an English teacher. We had like a 15, 16 page marking criteria. And even though you thought when you picked up somebody's essay or exam paper, you thought, well, that kid's normally good at English. You didn't have favourites. You just knew some were better than others at English. So when you got their paper, you did have an expectation. But I have to say, I was a stickler. You went through line by line through the 16 pages of marking criteria. And if they didn't deliver, they didn't deliver. And you know for a fact that I've tried to be as fair as I can. I try and have criteria. I don't just say, let's talk about our favourite show just because I want to say, yeah, or it's classic Who, so therefore it must be good. I don't do that. So I try and stick to the criteria. But yes, sometimes I'll fall on the wrong side of your tongue. And that happened here. So there was that one. And now Farsight, he's in the thread there. He's in the classroom. He said it's not a classic, but it isn't a mess. It had great ideas, but the story needed work. This era reinvigorated Who. You see, this is where me and you and the thread may totally disagree. I was obviously, oh gosh, how old was I then? About 20, I think it was. So it all depends on your age. When I was talking to Ryan, Connor, and Chris in Belfast, Connor said to me that this era was great and he loved it because as a kid, it scared him. The clowns scared him. Now, of course, he was a younger kid. I get it. So he won't want me dissing this, just like I wouldn't want somebody dissing Genesis of the Daleks. But we were trying to be authentic from where we were coming from. But that was as adults and maybe cynical adults. And of course, I've put in green Farsight saying, I remember my friends at school were talking about this season and season 26. So yes, you're making a pitch that whatever the panel thought, and we did all, I mean, I saw the Greatest Show in the Galaxy the day before we did the review. So I was fresh as and genned up and it just didn't engage me. But I have to appreciate at school, you said it caught people's imagination. And so, yeah, I'll give you that one. Lee Smith is still thinking, gosh, detentions, throwing stuff at a physics teacher. I told you one of my favorite detentions in practice was seeing my art teacher. And if you messed on with paints, he painted your face as the punishment. If you messed around with all the water when you're supposed to clean up afterwards, he put you in the sink and turned the taps on. That was his version of a detention. Neville, just joining in on this discussion about where you stand on this one, because I think I'm not just going to go through comments tonight. We need to talk about where we stand on what did this era actually mean. And one thing Hugh did say in our review is he said he thought it set the seeds of doom for RTD's era. Now, that is a contentious point, and I knew it at the time, but let's pick on that in a moment. Neville, I don't recall being overly impressed by it at the time, but I watched it recently and I thought it was interesting. There is something about it, though, I can't quite put my finger on it. Well, we tried, Neville. Maybe we failed, but I didn't think it... My third criteria is always, does it engage? And it didn't engage, but I could see all the bits they were trying to do. And I think I made an argument that they had the robot conductor, you had the kites, you had the clowns, that funeral hearse. I could see what they were trying to do. It was just, didn't quite cohere. Julie Coonan, I didn't really enjoy this episode. I was really uncomfortable with the way the Doctor dismissed Ace Fears. I'll come to that, Julie. I'm glad you said that. You can join me in detention because they're after us. In fact, I feel as though the gods of Ragnarok are the thread. I was born in 69. Mccoy, who really exemplifies the cultural shift at that time, says Hazel Scott. You can't look at any old shows in a bubble. They have to be considered in the context of their times. I do try and do that. I have to say, I do try and do that. But yeah, we just won't always agree, I think, is the point. But it's fun, isn't it, having a chat. Kez the Drone, it was one of the very few classic stories I was thinking of not bothering to watch till the end. It had some moments, though. And can I tell you, Kez, when I was reviewing it ready for the show on Sunday, I stopped after part 2. And I didn't want to start again. And I gave it a long time. It just wasn't hitting me. And I compared it to the Web Planet. The Web Planet, we all know, was worthy, was trying to do some really experimental stuff. And, you know, I mean, you can't knock the imagination and creativity of what they were trying to do with the Web Planet. But how many people have said, even when they've got the Blu-ray, they're struggling through it? We haven't got to the end of the Red Planet this time. So this is what I'm trying to say, yeah? I'm not trying to defend myself in detention. I am in detention. It's a fact. Farsight, I think the problem was they just didn't have the time and the money to make every story brilliant. Was it ever thus, I'd have to say. Right, so there's Farsight's comment, but here's a big one, so I'm going to go on the big screen for a moment. This is from Michael Webster. It's very rare that I find myself disagreeing with the panel, but you're going to this time. Okay. And there's a lot of good points you make, Michael, but I just wanted to pick on a few. I also agree that McCoy's performance is leaning too much towards his physical comedy instincts, but the overall quality of acting in this story is very good, in my opinion. The concept of the traveling circus being corrupted by aliens for their amusement, I find engaged me, but the execution, granted, was lacking. I found the location work was very effective, adding to the atmosphere of the story. So you see, there you go, Brendan. In conclusion, it's by no means great Doctor Who, but it's no worse than Horns of Nimon, Creature from the Pit, Meglos, to name but a few. And there lies one interesting argument, which I actually joined in at the time, because I said, we haven't reviewed yet officially Creature from the Pit, Horns of Nimon, Meglos, etc. I know that some of my panelists adore Meglos. I've already said I hated it. I kind of like Creature from the Pit, but they are the issues to mention when we do it. And Horns of Nimon had the certain dramatic theatrical moments, but there's elements of it I do like as well. So it's one of those. So we could even argue about the ones you listed there, Michael Webster, as the bad ones. It's funny, isn't it? And but there you go. But while you say all that, I do want you to keep considering when some fans think something is a bad story or a good story. When we come to doing the review, I will force the panelists to have to prove it. And when we do season 2's reviews, you know I make them give me scores, and the scores are accumulated even before they see the final result just at the end, so they can't fiddle their figures or anything else like that. So we try and be as authentic as we can, but I suppose don't always get it on the money. Good to see you, Sean. I've got all these classic episodes to catch up on. They're not stellar then, eh? No, not quite. Now, moving on. The computer's funny tonight. It's funny. Jim Hillis, also in Belfast. I couldn't disagree with you all more. Where to begin? This story is surreal and challenging, but it's clever. T.P. McKenna presents us with a shadow version of the Doctor and his dark connection with his travelling werewolf companion, and the humorless family of gods are a nod to the BBC execs of the day, or in this case, the gods are in the thread. The acting is excellent, combining the grotesque with the comic and frightening, and the overall effect is unsettling. Ian Reddington is a first-rate villain. This story is easily better, Brendan, than the Chibnall and RTD2 era. And as far as the Doctor's act at the end of the story, and he goes into that one. Can I just say also, though, we just review separately. That's why I think you saw in the clip, I was saying when I said special measures that I've actually given special measures to the Power of the Doctor, for example. And that was just judging by the criteria. It just didn't engage. It didn't cohere. And there might be some great merits in it. I mean, there could be some great effects in some of these stories. You can't knock season 1 RTD2 for the production values, really, if you compared it. But I try to force people not to compare. Just like when I had an English script and I had 16 pages of criteria, you just compare the criteria to the kids' work. I try and compare that one story to the criteria. I don't kind of go, but is this better than the Horns of Nimon? Because that will be judged on another day. That's what I try and do, okay? I do try and do this pretty thoroughly, but we will get it wrong. Completely. So anyway, thanks, Jim, because I appreciate your comments. So we had the TP McKenna one. We didn't, I don't think in our review we really discussed that a lot. A few points were said about it, but yeah, this idea that TP McKenna's Captain Cook was the binary opposite of the Doctor. He was seen as the kind of, the Valeyard to the Doctor type thing. Interesting idea. I mean, there were some very clever ideas there. But for every clever idea, I just think the execution needs to be done. And I think my argument about RTD half the time is there's a lot of ideas, but they're not developed or nurtured or crafted or drafted through. That's not quite what I'm saying about The Greatest Show, but I think they probably had too many good ideas and they needed to kind of just hone them. Now, here's Jim. I've got to get Jim up because I'm talking about his own comments. Like all the best stories, the story operates on several levels and challenges the audience to think their way to their own conclusions. That is laudable, and that is better to me. It's a bit like the Silurians. You have your decision to make at the end, whether you're on the unit brigadier side or you're with the Doctor. I think that's laudable. I like that. I used to struggle with the kids in class sometimes. I used to hate, they're like a clear ending. But I see your point, Jim. I see your point. And you can see your comments up there as well. Hopefully getting fair treatment. So Darko, in Boom, the effects budget go all the stops to convince that this is an alien war zone. But story-wise, Genesis is far more faithful to the war concept, while Boom is crass about it. I can't fault what you're saying there, Sadako. We did, like I said, I can't challenge the production values of season 1, but we all know they could have just gone to a quarry and saved their money for some other thing, to be quite honest. I don't think you necessarily needed a concocted, crafted rock rather than just going to be stood on a rock. SG, don't forget they had to completely change the studio recording because of an asbestos problem. I know we did mention that SG. Maybe we didn't make enough of it. I understand it will have been a massive, and it was nearly cancelled, wasn't it? It was nearly over. Game over. They weren't going to be able to make anything. But because Sharda was still in everybody's mind, and obviously we had the season 20, when obviously it wasn't supposed to end with the King's Demons, was it? It was supposed to end with the Dalek story. I get it. J&T was thinking, no, we've got to push this through. We've got to try our best to get this landed. So that is laudable. That is, certainly. And of course, Jim wants to make a very clear point about, let's face it, whether it's a psychic circus, the gods of Ragnarok, the Adrian Mole BMX rider, all that, yes, there's a lot of metaphor and a lot of allegory with sly swipes at those attacking the show at the time, whether it was BBC execs, fans who know it all. I know there were some great ideas, but Jim and everybody, I'll ask everybody now, right? So I'll stop my kind of trying to talk myself out of my own detention. I think we all understand there were lots of clever ideas being mooted and played around with The Greatest Show in the Galaxy. But a bit like Warrior's Gate sometimes, a bit like some of those, sometimes they don't land. Are they explained enough? Are they actually worked enough? Or is it because we all read the book? Or is it because we've read loads of interviews since and we are quite well honed on what they were trying to do? Now, what they're trying to do and what they did on one overnight performance, that's what we try and compare. And I thought we were fair that it wasn't fully executed. Now it's up to you. What does everybody think? The ideas about parody in the fans, the ideas about parody in the BBC execs, was that dangerous to do when you just had Trial of a Time Lord? It's almost, right, Charlie, you said earlier, was I trying to bait you by saying the greatest mess in the galaxy? But was J&T trying to bait the BBC executives with, and Andrew Cartmel, by doing this? Is this what we want from the actual TV program in 2025? Too many self-references to it. It's all very meta. Is that really what we want? Now, I suppose you could get away with it if it was clear what they were doing, and it engaged throughout and it cohered. And I think that's where I felt flat. Am I explaining myself right here? Am I getting myself out of detention? If you've got any questions, everybody, throw them in. If you've got your versions and your points you want to get across, because tonight really has to be about you. You're the stars of this. Jim is also saying, before I move on, loved it on transmission, Brendan. And I think that is the best. The contemporaneous notes. I always look for my notes from my diaries to try and prove what did I think at the time. And I think that's important. But remember, Jim, there's such a thing as revisionism. And there's such a thing as when you are older, maturer, you sometimes see things a different way. And it doesn't mean you're poo-pooing the earlier version. This is just the updated version. Just like Jim, I saw some of the team who update the special effects. You could argue on the same logic. Why is that necessary? We should just see the original. But people change views. People change. People want to hone things. Adrian Sherlock. J&T went into season 20 with a Dalek script and a planned multi-doctor story. That season should have been a knockout, but things went wrong. Hence why I do agree with people that they got the tents and they thought we have to do this. Jim Hillis is really enjoying this. The BBC executives would have been too thick to see the metaphor. I disagree, Jim, but for a different reason. They wouldn't have watched the Doctor Who, would they? They wouldn't have reviewed the programme. They wouldn't have put the tape in the machine. They weren't interested in Doctor Who. So they would have missed the metaphor because they just didn't watch. That was the other problem. Paul Richards, the tone of McCoy's era is more goofy and comedic compared to Colin Baker's. When you get a doctor like that, yeah, we all have our differences and we all have our favorites. And yeah, the style for me doesn't work for me, but I always watched and I like Sylvester McCoy as a bloke. And so, it's just, styles of doing it. Mad Mackham, on transmission, I thought it was a bit of a joke, to be honest, and I worried about the show's future. Now I like it for what it tried without an obvious agenda, unlike today's Who. It's a good point. Fair dues. Yeah, they were trying to do an awful lot of meta things. They were trying to do lots of clever concepts, and whether it landed or not, worthy for trying. Whereas nowadays, I'm not sure if there's any clever ideas. All it seems to be doing is, And we will on Sunday, tomorrow at 2 p.m. Me, Problem Bean, and James will discuss RTD, bringing Doctor Who into disrepute with his latest comments. Sadako 24. I think what's key about Greatest Show is that it's a fantasy story, not science fiction. That's probably it, Sadako, where I fall flat. I can't stand the surreal stories. I will try and see what they were trying to do, but as soon as you make something surreal, or as soon as you do the fantastical, godlike element, just like Q in Star Trek, I just think you kind of break in a different, not a fourth wall, but you're just breaking their context of how they operate normally. And when Captain Kirk, it wouldn't be Captain Kirk with Q, but you know what I mean? When the Captain Picard is trying to work out how to deal with this fantastical figure, the truth is you can never defeat fantastical figures like that because they're on a different plane. And I'd rather just stick in the same plane. Daleks coming down the corridor. So how do you deal with that? When you think that Dalek is some sort of godlike figure, and I struggle. Anyway, as Sadako saying, therefore the solutions come from symbols and amulets rather than scientific explanations and MacGuffins. Yeah, I won't keep gabbling on. It wasn't for me, that, but I know a lot of you loved it. I know. I always like the comedy in Classic Who, said SG, but most of it has aged well. What comedy, SG? I know that you would have a line, Chop Suey, the Galactic Emperor, and all the rest of it. I didn't think we had that much, really. This is where I think RTD's got it wrong, where RTD seems to think Doctor Who was always comedic, and you think, well, not really. It was trying to do behind the sofa, and there might be one quip here and there. I didn't think it was a comedy show, but RTD has turned it into light entertainment. Ironically enough, him and Bad Wolf have said 80s Who, Sylvester McCoy's era particularly, was light entertainment pastiche. Isn't it weird? Julie, I liked Sylvester McCoy as the Doctor. At the time, we felt he was never allowed to be the Doctor he could be, and that he was being set up to fail. I didn't mind some of the slapstick. So Julie, I might have to just suffer my punishment and take the detention, the Doctor Who detention, because a lot of you were saying, no, I liked it. And I think that's valid, and I'll always allow that. And you know, that is one thing about my Sense for Your channel. I want diverse opinion. I really don't want us all just going, yes, 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 I agree. I love you too. Bye. That's not debate. Debate is dying in Britain, and we need to make sure we can actually disagree with each other, but still be in the same room and still actually reach out to each other and sometimes say, I don't know why you like the slapstick. Please tell me why. And just, you know, explain it. I think that's what Doctor Who fans need to do a lot more of. And I think that's why I love this community, because we've been doing it since the first show. Jim Hillis, Peggy Mount was hilarious. I loved her in her comedies, as was Daniel Peacock. But the comedy arose from the drama. This is crucial. I'm not challenging that. I won't challenge that. I think that's all right. Paul, the series is dead now. The rumors are too persistent. Definitely no Christmas special. Yeah. And there will be more on that tomorrow. Don't worry. Last one before I move on. Sadako, I sense RTD's favorite era was the Williams era. I get the sense he believes if that comedic direction had continued in the 80s, the show would have still been popular. Look, for every City of Death you had as some will say, a Creature from the Pit, or you had a Horns of Nymon, or it's interesting, isn't it? It is interesting because the Williams, then obviously as we moved into, I call it the Douglas Adams era, really, because he was so influential with the undergraduate humor, really. Let's have a look where we stand here. Am I getting out of this detention? Am I still in big doo-doo? I know we've got things to discuss further as well. Let's have a look. So, now this is from Paul. He's from the same neck of the woods as me, but he doesn't agree with us. While seeing things differently from the panel, he's tried to be nice and diplomatic because it's a lovely thread. And then he says, hardly revelatory then will be my admission to being very taken with the direction in which Andrew Cartmel steered the show, with the Doctor's nature and extent being much more ambiguous than ever before. I always felt that, so long as there wasn't adherence to the Doctor's core elements of heroism, compassion and decency, together with the question, Doctor Who, remaining emphatically unanswered, unlike the Timeless Children, then allowance could be made for extremes of character exploration. Now, if Paul was sat next to me now, I take a lot of what he said, but I would challenge that bit in the middle when he talks about the Doctor's core elements of heroism, compassion, and decency, because as I think it was Julie Coonan said earlier, the cruelty, it has to be called cruelty. What does everybody think of this? Those who love the Sylvester McCoy era, and there are lots of reasons to like it, I know, and I will remind everybody that we did do a review of the Remembrance of the Daleks, and we really did praise it. And you can see that the best political story in Doctor Who. So we are balanced. And so the Sylvester McCoy era with Ace, we praised there, for example. So hopefully that gives us a bit more credibility in this one. But where I want to kind of push back on Paul here is, how does everybody stand with this Ace thing in Curse of Fenric, Ghostlight? Here, she said in episode 1, she was scared of clowns. She doesn't like circuses. Didn't she hear something? But I can't remember if she said she heard a scream or whether she just said, I can hear something and there's nothing. And the Doctor actually looks quite angry and definitely manipulative and pushy. Now, knowing what we saw in Ghostlight and Curse of Fenric, how far is this acceptable? Because, you know, when I was at school, we didn't teach them all the nonsense that Juno Dawson teaches. We taught about consent to teenagers, and we taught about love and what a relationship is and compromise and stuff like that. We didn't talk about lust and predatory stuff apart from consent and the law. But how far was he pushing her and abusing? Look, I'm not being dull and boring, surely, but how far was it pushing it? So what does everybody think? That's a question I've asked to everyone else in the classroom who've put me here. Yeah, Sonny Waffle says, yeah, she says, I hear screaming. And he forced her in there. And remember, it was a phobia as well. The far side, the doctor had no choice with this. He had to, otherwise he couldn't save her from Fenric. Yes, I know that. Yeah, there was a bit more in the plot on that one. But where do you stand, Farsight, with this one? Somebody's got a phobia, like a phobia of spiders, and you say, no, you go in there. And I'm ignoring everything you say. I thought in this mental health world of safe spaces and everything, that wouldn't be allowed. That would be seen as cruelty and abusive. So where do you stand in how you view how the Sylvester doctor deals with Ace over several stories dealing with her fears? I think it's a fascinating one, and it's something I found uncomfortable, and that's why I mentioned it in our review. It's not getting me out of detention, I know. Sadako, some would put it as a necessary Machiavellian nature to be evil, or even as tough love, in pushing Ace through the trauma that holds her back. But you don't like it. It's a funny one, isn't it? Because we want to watch Doctor Who. We want behind the sofa. We actually want to be scared and thrilled. But there's a way of doing it. And I don't think, and please tell me if I'm wrong, I'm trying to think if when the Doctor was cruel to, say, Sarah or Joe Grant, I know there was cheek. And I know there was that. I mean, the famous bit in Ark in Space when he's goading her to make her go through that chute. Yeah, I remember that bit. But I don't think that was cruel love. He was doing a deliberate policy there just to make her survive. Or is the same argument acceptable here? Jim Hillis, the Doctor was building resilience, which I approve of, actually, and breadth of understanding in Ace, Irish Christian brothers fashion. Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, I applaud building resilience. I prefer that to actually us all kind of, mollycoddling people. I think that's why we've got a few problems with children sometimes. But there's a fine line. And the question I'm asking really is, did the Doctor cross that fine line? Mad Mackham, I think this shows ideas on an ambiguous Doctor could have been used interestingly. You can't help compare to the Timeless Child, the War Doctor, and a new First Doctor being canon. It'll never go away, will it? It'll never go away, all that stuff. Adrian Sherlock, Cartmel had good ideas, but the execution was amateurish. I still think numerically there were too many. You know what I mean? It was like they were trying to do too much at once. Making your Doctor dark, a darker, more mysterious Doctor, is a project in itself. When you add the narrative arc for Ace, and when you add Fenric, and then you did the Hand of Omega, I think, and you needed Silver Nemesis, I think in the end you almost do too much. And then you now do Meta taking on the BBC executives and Doctor Who fans. And I mean, and another question I want to ask everybody since we're on it. The BMX ride and all the rest of it. I know I did the review last week, but I've drank a lot since. I've forgotten his name. Who've been a parody of Doctor Who fans and all the rest of it. Now, okay, very meta, a little gentle dig at Doctor Who fans. Is that acceptable? And is that kind of something we should do, even just on an entertaining level? When RTD, when he did Dot and Bubble, and we all went mad, and said he was trying to get a rise out of the audience by saying, didn't you notice they were all white? What's the difference? What is the difference? Because again, it seems to be the producers and the writers playing with their audience. Now, playing with your audience is also scaring them and making them tense and thrilled in a horror and all the rest of it. I get it. But there's, as I said, I'm going to resort in my detention to saying there's a fine line though. Julie, Ace is a tough character, but in this she was clearly distressed. You would think the Doctor would pick up on her fears. Yeah, I thought a hero would, but even though I take Jim's and everybody else's points. Jeremy, the worst Doctor Who story of all time was The Timeless Child. And we have reviewed that, and everybody can go and check. We did say special measures. Don't you worry. We're there. SG, but really you wanted them to visit the circus. That's the whole story after all. It is, But normally you have them stumbling, or like, we did the Sontaran experiment recently. Harry falls down a ravine. You just have them clumsily getting into situations. Or with Revenge of the Cybermen, Sarah gets bitten by a cybermat, forces them to go to Voga. That's how you want the narrative written, really. That's driving it. And I think in this case, it was almost like he was dragging her into the tent, which a bit uncomfortable, wasn't it? Stephen Braddock, hello, good to see you. Hope you're well. I liked that there was quite a lot of scary moments in this surreal off-kilter story. Oh, the chief clown. I mean, the clowns are an absolute amazing. And the funeral, I think I said in the review that mixing a clown with his amazing movement with the funeral kind of gear, that's an incredible, clever move. Very, very clever. The kites I found were a surreal quality that I did like. I really like that. I mean, it's the new drone, isn't it? Really, Big Brother. So how are we doing in my detention here? I can. Am I a good lad at the moment? Adrian Sherlock, they lost sight of the fact it was an adventure show first and foremost. You see, we all stand in different positions here. I feel as I'm pulling more people into the detention. Right. And this also is from Paul. He was just finishing off here. The Seventh Doctor's era was often synonymous with his being at least one step ahead of the narrative, yet this was largely absent in Greater Show, which he thought was better. And I do. I don't like the Doctor always knowing what's happening. It has to be said, however, that this period represented by dint of asinine scheduling the worst ever abuse of our show by the BBC, an abuse more than capable of nullifying any good effect due to Cartmel's innovations. Yes, well, I mean, the scheduling in the end is what nailed it. This would have carried on. They could have experimented, developed this darker Doctor, and built a series back. That's what we wanted RTD2 to do, to establish the core of the program after being gutted and messed with and toyed with and experimented with till I don't think anyone knew what Doctor Who was. Did we say he, she, they? Are they all gender fluid Time Lords now? What's your origin story? We wanted just go back to core. It's almost like, let's do the William Hartnell speech to Susan. Go forward in all your beliefs and prove to me that I just go back to basics. But no, RTD couldn't help himself. He had to have a bi-generation. He had to have a trans child in it. That's not the issue. The issue is how he used it as a female presenting Time Lord, and that they dealt with the meta crisis of that was the issue. All that nonsense. So I take your point, Paul. New Who hater, hello. Hi all. I'm taking a break from the Doctor Who scene for a couple of weeks, but just wanted to let Brendan know this is my favourite Doctor Who channel. Bye for now, but I'll be back. Yeah, I'm taking a break until a new series. Anyway, I appreciate your comments, and look, I'm a big boy. I can cope with my detention. I did it in class. You make mistakes. You can sometimes misspeak. You can sometimes overspeak. You can sometimes get hysterical, and you can sometimes exaggerate. We all do. It's part of the thing. And I also talk fast as well sometimes. So I get it. But thanks for your comment. I appreciate it. Brian, who is also in detention, remember, Brian was on the panel. It's amazing how many interesting ideas from McCoy's stories were ruined by trying to be too clever to the point you're scratching your head and wondering what is going on. My measure for everything, remember, how many books over my 30 years did I teach? If the book is only understood because you have to read the study guide, how good is the book? So how good is the greatest show in the galaxy if you watched it once? And I'm not buying into us Doctor Who geeks who say, well, after watching it 8 times, I actually quite like it. Well, sorry, that's not TV. That's being a fan. And so honestly, my measure is if you read it once as a book, if you watched it once, did it make sense? Did it engage? And therefore, that's the measure. It has to be. So yeah, I can see the point that's being made there. And Jeremy is dying to see my Bigenerates at 2 p.m. with Problem Bean and James tomorrow, because we talked about the Gadio. Someone said that they didn't know what Gadio was. Well, I don't like all these terms, but anyway, tomorrow we'll talk about RTD. Don't you worry. So it's like this is TMR. Now, there were people, I had to find them, of course, who did agree with what we said. There's a few people tonight saying that. TMR is one of them. Great debate. I have to agree with the panel on this one. Like Silver Nemesis, a good concept, but poorly executed. You see, Silver Nemesis had so many themes going in it. We know which ones they are. But it was just seemed to be too compressed. A lot going on, but not much happening. Says TMR. But in this story, the Doctor going from light and fluffy to dark and back again is too disjointed. You see, okay, if you call it tough love when he takes Ace into the tent, even though she's got a phobia, there were points when he said, you know, there's no problem here, there's nothing to be worried about, and you have to believe him. But then later on, he'd say, I think I've got this. And you think, so you've just walked into a trap. Well, what does everybody make of this then? If you do like this era, that our hero actually blundered into that tent and into the cage into a trap where he and everybody else could die with no plan. In fact, no hint and no clue that he was going to get caught. And no plan to get out. And that's where I sometimes used to think the Jodie Whittaker era was, where sometimes, you know, when she in the Legend of the Sea Devils, and she shouted at that sea devil. She shouted at that sea devil when she had no defense. She wasn't going to get away in time. And then he shot at her. He just had a rubbish aim. I mean, it's a cop-out. I hate the Space Jesus version of any Doctor. I really do. Paul Richards, Verity Lambert said she believes the ratings failed because nobody's taken it seriously and it becomes too camp and silly. We'll have to find these quotes because you know what it's like. Evidence. But please, if you can find it, because I take your point. I know she was quite diplomatic most of the time, wasn't she? Adrian Sherlock in Australia in 2013 in Night of the Doctor, the Sisterhood asked man or woman over 10 years ago. I know it was the Stephen Moffat era that did it. That's what nailed all this gender fluid stuff. And so the Night of the Doctor is part of that whole mess, isn't it? And yet I loved Night of the Doctor. Farsight, Silver Nemesis was badly written. It could have been so much better. Isn't that always what we ended up saying about some of the 80s Who? Underworld in 70s Who, we just say, if only they had a budget. But most of the time in the 70s, you know, start with season 7 and work your way through with Christopher H. Bidmead and everything at the end. There were loads of good concepts and application. It was just, it might have looked as though it was done a bit on the cheap. You know, how many Logopolitans did we have? Did they just have a little wee abacus? Anyway, now we also did have our discussion on Carnival of Monsters. That seemed to get much more universal acclaim because I think we all see that as just an enjoyable comfort blanket. So just to show you, J.C. Marshall, easily my favorite Robert Holmes pen story. Thank you. Peter Dixon, people will be conflicted here because remember, I asked the question, and what does everyone make of this? I just said that when I watch Carnival of Monsters again for the review, is this the best when Pertwee is allowed as the third Doctor to travel away from being in exile and on Earth? And of course, this triggered people because people were going, well, I love Unit and I love the Brigadier. And I'm not, remember, by asking the question, there's no implicit criticism of that era. I'm just saying, I seem to really like John Pertwee's Doctor when he's on Peladon, when he's on Draconia, when he's here on Interminor. To me, he seemed to really show even greater flair in all this diplomacy with the Draconians and stuff like that. So that's why I was asking that. But that's why Peter Dixon's picked up on it and said people will be conflicted here because Nicholas Courtney was charismatic and Unit held up well. And he mentions that Terrence Dick says there were only two basic stories you could have on Earth. One's the mad scientist, one's the alien invasion. That wasn't why I was asking it. It was not a criticism of Unit. It was just saying I think that the Third Doctor seems to just excel when you don't restrict him, you know? Anyway, Michael Stewart says no. And Lee Patton just says, excellent review. When repeated in 1981, it brought back childhood memories. That Five Faces season is going to go down in history for some people as the you were already watching Doctor Who, but oh my God, when you just got this golden moment of time when there were hardly any, there were no repeats of old Doctors. You had to watch a bit of Blue Peter and get a clip. But this was amazing to actually see an unearthly child. Never had seen that. I'd only seen a photograph or two. To then see the Crotons, which came from nowhere. Who thought these alien creatures had a Birmingham accent? That was a phenomenal revelation. So, but the Crotons I loved. And of course, Pertwee. I should wash my mouth out. Troughton. To see Troughton in action, that was a revelation. And, you know, the Three Doctors, then the Carnival of Monsters, those two together, 8 episodes of Pertwee's era when it was really so established in colour, Doctor Who. I tell you what, I was in my element. I was a bit nonplussed by seeing Logopolis again straight away, but I know why they did it. I'm right, aren't I, Lee Smith? Those Crotons had a Brummie accent. A bit like the Genesis of the Daleks, those Thals were Cockneys, weren't they? You know, I mean, you know, it travels, cosmopolitan world, I tell you. So, right, Charlie, we're bringing it back to you because you sent a lovely comment as well, and I want to then get to the Bi-Generates. Boys and girls, mums and dads, talking of variety, let's have a round of applause for Brendan for the brilliant content recently. Now, you can't applaud me when I'm in detention, but I'm putting that up just to say thank you, Charlie, because you obviously are clearly one of those people who, this is what you want in fandom. We can disagree. Charlie hated our review of The Greatest Show in the Galaxy. Hated it. Hated us, thought we were baiting you, you know. Whoa, I totally disagree with you. And as you said, Charlie, I'm not watching this panel till I finish. You're ripping into my favorite, you know, show. No, off I'll go. And there he is then sending a comment like that. And I'm not saying it because it's about me. I'm saying it because it's just lovely when people can show that complexity and ability to rise above our arguments about Doctor Who. I think that's important. I really do. Jim, the Five Faces season was a marvelous idea. It ramped up the anticipation for the new Doctor and brilliantly showcased the Doctors. And I have to say, I've thought about this so many times. Could it be repeated in some way? And I just think it was of its time. It was a great moment, wasn't it? On BBC Two, we were just lucky. I think that's what you've got to put it down to. We were just lucky timing. Paul Richards, the idea that we could be in a miniscope is chilling. Carnival had great ideas. It's ahead of its time. It's very Matrix. We often say that Ark in Space was very Alien, as in Alien came after. And the miniscope is that it's that chill of the Matrix, isn't it? When you realize that we might all be just bodies in some sort of kind of, you know, umbilical cord fluid, and are we just being sent dreams? I mean, this is our little program on, you know, 5:45, 6 o'clock on a Saturday night, while your mum and dad were making the tea, and we were watching this little 25-minute program after Basil Brush or something else, or Pink Panther show. We were getting concepts way beyond our age range. This is why we love this program. And this is why we don't want RTD just being an idiot with it. There's just no need for him. You know, RTD, you're sitting on a gold mine. You are sitting on, I think, one of the richest seams in television drama. And you are somehow, your drill bit is just not hitting the gold. How are you missing I just can't. It's unbelievable, really, isn't it? I mean, it is so easy what you could do with Doctor Who, with the gift of just inheriting that program from all the great producers and writers and actors before. It is just a sitting duck. But RTD's managed to miss the mark. Stephen Braddock, the cliffhanger to episode 1 of Carnival with the hand grabbing the TARDIS was, yeah, that is my moment. It's one of those moments. I can remember seeing it and being amazed, and also thinking, oh, there's something about it that is so Doctor Who. The Dudley Simpson music and everything about it, the jacket, the color of the jacket of Pertwee. There's just something it's just visceral for me. So yeah, this is why we love Doctor Who, isn't it? I mean, this is really on the money. And again, Doctor Who has more scope for ideas than any other format for a program, and RTD is stifling it. And I totally concur, Stephen. Pearl Richards, RTD is ignoring the scope of Doctor by dragging it down to a soap opera fantasy level. Yeah, I mean, why is he doing this? Hasler Scott, in classic Who fandom, everyone has favourite eras and doctors, but it still all feels like Doctor Who. Chibnall, Geordie, Ncuti, just straight up not Doctor Who. That's the difference. Now, the Bigenerate show we did last Wednesday, obviously we looked at the TARDIS Travels piece where Stephen Moffat and RTD are in the TARDIS. And there's another piece about RTD protecting Doctor Who from Disney. I'm not going to rehearse all that again. You've watched the shows, and if you haven't, they're good fun. But this is one comment that came from Mr. Squinty Mint. I always want to say Dickie Mint, Ken Dodd's Diddy Man. I think a problem with Brendan's suggestion of non-fans being involved is the longevity of the show and the fact that it's now a national institution. You see, this comes back to the debate I'm having with myself, never mind everybody else. Now, just what everybody's opinion on it. You know that quite a while ago now, while we were all suffering from our angst and anxiety about what the hell is going on, I did a survey on Twitter and we got about 160, 180 responses. And you can see when I asked the question, do you want the show cancelled? 21% said that. Reboot, 17%. 41% said continue, and 22% said rest. Having said that, it was quite clear from the answers I saw from the continue, 41%, that a lot of them said, but only if RTD goes, only if the Doctor changes, and they had a lot of provisos and caveats. Now, so this has been going on a while, and I'm well aware if I did that survey now, I think the stats would be much more different. However, this is where we roughly are. My head's ruminating about how you can keep the show going but rest it at the same time, and I think there's possibilities. And as we were discussing that in the light of this Bigenerate's conversation about the showrunners Moffat and RTD and what they've done with the doctors and everything else, we all have comments about. I was making a point that I think we need nobody who's been in on New Who at all. We want somebody new. Not new to TV, not new to writing, and we also don't want a showrunner. I think we need a writer's team, and I think we need a creative tension back. But my fundamental point that Mr. Squinty Mint has challenged is, I did, in my kind of talking fast and everything, say it would be preferable, I think, for now, that it wasn't somebody in on the know, somebody who knows all about canon, who knows about all the kind of different levels of, the Gallifrey and Time Lords and this and that and that. I think it would serve Doctor Who in the future better, this is my assertion, if you had somebody new, a TV executive writer, who didn't know too much about Doctor Who. I mean, there's nobody on the planet in TV who hasn't heard of it, but hasn't really dabbled in it. So just like Malcolm Hulke wrote for Crossroads and other stuff, and the Avengers, there were established, experienced television writers, and they knew what audiences liked. It's the same with Robert Holmes. It's the same with Terry Nation. I could go on. And I'm just thinking, if you could get somebody who's just not been in this network, not been involved in the big finish, not been involved in, being friends with RTD there, going out for a meal there, doing something on the DVD extras regarding the documentaries and stuff. I just mean, no. And they come to it and they ask questions. And this person will say, it's been going 62 years. Tell me in a nutshell what it's about. And basically, they will get a chance once they get to see the package by asking the right questions where they think in this TV climate where they could take it next. You see, RTD has seen it as a launch pad for politics, obviously, but a proper TV writer and executive not knowing much about Doctor Who will go, right. So fundamentally, what's the point of the Doctor? Fundamentally, what's his motivation? Fundamentally, why does he need a companion? Why does he keep coming back to Earth? Once they establish certain interesting answers, they might start to think, right, so to me, the essence of the program is this. And yes, it'll have a different slant and style on it, and off they go. But not to get bogged down in, so we need to heal the Flux universe, and I think none of that. Just leave all that out. But Squinty Mint disagrees with that. I wasn't saying you can't have a fan write for Doctor Who. I just think we need to kind of dislocate a bit so we don't go all meta again, like the greatest show in the galaxy. See what everybody's saying? Peter Venkman, hello. I don't think so. He'd know we'd rather have that and do something even more ridiculous than that I won't type, because they'd probably do it. Yeah, okay. Zero Room Brian. A fan should not be in charge. They should be acted. And the trouble is, when you say consultant, we think of Ian Levine last time with J&T. Yeah, they're good for clips, put that clip in Earthshock and stuff like that. Paul Richards, Charlie Brooker and Ben Wheatley should work on Who with great new writers who respect the Doctor's character. And actually, familiarity breeds contempt is the phrase, isn't it? And I think RTD is too close to Doctor Who now. Stephen Moffat, Chris Chibnall, because they are fans and because they know Doctor Who pretty well, I think it creates contempt. And the contempt that happens is they're bored with it and they want to do something new with it. Somebody who's new to Doctor Who won't have that need to do something new with the 16th Doctor. They'll just want to deliver what they think works for this format. And I think that's something that we should entertain, as if we were all the gods of Ragnarok or we were the TV executives. I think if we were pitching for a new showrunner, producer, writer, chief writer, I think I'd be fascinated by their take on it from the outside, because I'm always aware of what the mainstream might want, because I'm always aware that we had a point with a bit of Chris Eccleston and David Tennant when a lot of mainstream casual television viewers were watching and loving Doctor Who. And we need to get back to that for the survival of the program. In the late 80s, whether we argue about it or not, the reduced audience meant it came back to us lot. And so they were serving us lot, joking about us lot. That's not where you want to be. You want to be ignoring the fans, really. We'll always come back. Doctor Who's our program. It's the others that we need to recruit. Kez the Drone. Make it gear. Add more trannies and employ... Kez the Drone. Wash your mouth out. Well, yeah. But I know what you're saying. That's what you seem to think season one's done. Julie Coonan, you said a while back that there are a lot of science fiction writers out there. It would be great to... What I said, Julie, is go to Waterstones as a daft example and go to the section where all the science fiction books are. Now, some of them won't be here anymore, sadly. Some of them will be very old. However, my point is you can see there's a range of science fiction writers who are established and published. Isn't it worth RTD, if he is still a showrunner, or whoever is the showrunner or chief writer, to talk to them, to bring them in, rather than get Juno Dawson or Inua Ellams, who have no background in science fiction. That was, I thought, the most obvious thing to do, if that's what you were bothered about, i.e. doing Doctor Who. Adrian Sherlock, Brendan, I don't think fans are the issue. It's the show being used as a platform for propaganda. I think I'm right, and I think you're right. Do you see what I mean? There's two different things being said in that piece. If you know what I mean. Well, but there you go, folks. That was actually my detention. Have I passed my detention? Would you want me to do another detention when we've done a range of shows? And my other question before we go is, you need to tell us what you want us to review. I try not to review just a classic cert, because that's a bore, because everybody will say it was great. Yes, it's nice to sometimes say, isn't that a nice program? But all we say to each other is, wasn't it really good? I like to see those middle ranking Doctor Who stories where we could go either way. I picked Greatest Show in the Galaxy, and I didn't know we were going to say what we said. I didn't know I was going to say what I said. I didn't know I was going to get the reaction we got. It's just, So it's fascinating. Hope you liked the intro. I hope you liked the idea that we're going to be able to talk and reflect a little bit more, because sometimes my shows I try and structure and we get through them and all the rest of it. And it's good to talk. Apparently Joan Rivers said that, didn't she? Yes. And we are back on tomorrow. Me, James, and Lee, problem being, discussing the latest from RTD, who wants to solve the world's ills. We'll do that tomorrow too. And in the meantime, everybody, I've really enjoyed that. Hopefully we've come out of the detention and we can all go home and catch the school bus together now. Yeah, okay. Well, thank you, everybody, and see you tomorrow.